Hey, so Dr. Doyle is a retired staff anesthesiologist in the Department of General Anesthesiology at the Cleveland Clinic, as well as a retired professor of anesthesiology at the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine of Case Western Reserve University. And he now lives in Arizona. He first joined Mensa in 1972.
I'm sorry.
And received his MD degree in 82 and his PhD in biomedical engineering in 1986, both from the University of Toronto. In 2017, he received his Doctor of Philosophy.
Yeah. I joined a Zoom call.
I think you need to mute. Let's see where I was at. Received his Doctor of Philosophy degree from the University of Pretoria in the field of moral philosophy. He has had a lifelong interest in the neuroscience behind consciousness. His most recent book on the topic of transhumanism was published by Springer, and so that's available for purchase. And Dr. Doyle has also received teaching awards on 4 different occasions. And he does have a website. It's DanielJohnDoyle.com if you want to read up more about him, or I'm sure links to some of his book or some other things he's done. So I'll let him take it away.
Okay, well, let's share the screen then. Host disabled participant screen sharing. We'll have to activate screen sharing to show my slide set. So we'll fix that if we can.
Yeah, it's not allowing you. You should have.
That's strange. I've never encountered that before.
Okay, hold on just a second. Because I really am logged in, and if give me just 1 second to log in on this screen. I don't know why you have to do it on multiples.
So I can share. I have a green share button at the bottom of my screen.
Okay, and it looks like I can share now. So
okay.
This probably is working better now. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Neurocognitive enhancement, revision E. Now, the slide set that I'm presenting is a subset of a larger slide set, which is more comprehensive. And if you write me for copy the slides, I'd be glad to give you the comprehensive slide set, but I want to keep this under an hour or so because I had enough for basically a semester's work. So I call it evaluating the present, imagining the future, proceeding wisely. And if you write to me at djdoyle@hotmail.com, I'd be glad to give you all of the slides. So I'm an anesthesiologist, now recently retired. Here I am working with a resident with a video laryngoscopy procedure. And here are some of my credentials: MD 82, PhD 86, et cetera, et cetera. The books, early on, Computer Programs in Clinical and Laboratory Medicine. Later on, What Does It Mean to Be Human? Life, Death, Personhood, and the Transhumanist Movement, as well as the clinical books on airway management, which is my area of expertise. The things I want to talk about here are IQ and Beyond, the Bell Curve book controversy, drugs, neural operation and IQ, electrical brain enhancement, and then some of the ethical issues behind this. The idea of cognitive enhancement is not new. It shows up in the science fiction and speculative literature. For example, we're all familiar with Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This dystopian novel depicts a society where individuals are genetically engineered and conditioned with fit specific roles, some receiving cognitive enhancements to control their thoughts and behavior. Here, Flowers for Algernon, of a story of a mentally challenged man who undergoes experimental surgery to increase his intelligence, and he faces both intellectual and emotional growth challenges, as it turns out that the intervention, which is highly effective, is also temporary in effect. And Neuromancer by William Gibson, a cyberpunk novel where characters interface their minds with technology. And this, of course, is preceding the real world concept of neural implants, which are very much a real thing. but in most cases, simply to make a disabled person whole again, able to, for example, communicate with people when they may be totally paralyzed, as an example. So let's take a look at intellect, cognition, and IQ. Here are 5 key cognitive domains: executive function like planning and strategy, working memory associated with calculation and problem solving, attention, speed, and remembering. And together, this comprises about 90% of human cognition. This is one particular approach to this, but there's many others. But all of this summarized down to a single number in some cases, the Wechsler intelligence score, but there's other metrics as well. 68% of the people are plus or minus 1 standard deviation. The standard deviation is 15. And IQs are calibrated with a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 15, and they're recalibrated every few decades because of the Flynn effect, which is people are getting more intelligent, scoring better on IQ tests as the general population gets exposure to more ideas and more concepts. The concept that has raised a lot of controversy is the bell curve. You saw the bell curve here, and the question is, how does intelligence arise? What is the basis for it? So the book, 1994, so it's getting a little on the old side, they purported that there were connections between race and intelligence, and they came up with a substantial amount of evidence in their favor. They also argue that those with high intelligence, the cognitive elite, are becoming separated from those of average or below average intelligence, and it's a source of social division within the United States. So very controversial book, and as a result, there's been what we call the bell curve debate, and a number of academics have looked at the strengths and weaknesses of this. And in fact, here is another book, which is an edited volume, Race, Intelligence, and the Future of America, called The Bell Curve Wars. And those people interested in some of the special technical and psychometric challenges of IQs can read this book and others, but basically it is a matter of some controversy, particularly as it relates to race. And later on, we'll have a chance to take a look about whether or not there are any genes that are responsible for intelligence in some way. One question is, are there some scientific questions that should not be explored on moral grounds? Could this be one of them? What about research that has the potential to upset the social order, putting one group above another? Well, it's an interesting philosophical question. Is there anything that we shouldn't research? And I asked ChatGPT, what are some scientific questions that should not be explored on moral grounds? And it came up with 10 answers to consider: human cloning, invasive brain research, designer babies. Now, some of these things I think we'd be quite comfortable with, like invasive brain research under the right circumstances. We already have Neuralink helping a number of people. So this is what ChatGPT had to say. Incidentally, ChatGPT is one of the intelligences I often argue with. I will propose something that I think is correct and get ChatGPT to tell me why I'm wrong. And then sometimes we come to a consensus and sometimes we don't. Now, the concept that Howard Gardner has pushed over the last few decades is the multiple intelligence theory. And he says there's multiple intelligence: spatial, musical, logical, mathematical. And here it is in more detail. So he's saying there's multiple things. For example, we don't measure musical intelligence on a standard IQ test, nor do we measure emotional intelligence, which we'll have a chance to mention, or interpersonal skills. So Gardner says there's multiple intelligence that we have to take a look at, and it's more than simple logic and linguistic skills that are so commonly measured in ordinary IQ tests. So here is his various kinds of intelligence with its various characteristics, and indicating what related occupations people often take when they are gifted in one of these 8 kinds of intelligence. But equally important to some people is the concept of emotional intelligence, recognition of emotions, understanding their nature, and the methods of managing them. And I have seen in my own experience that some very, very intelligent people become leaders in their field, particularly in hospitals, because that's my experience, only to find out that they have little in the way of emotional intelligence and are able to offend people unnecessarily without any real effort. And they often find themselves out before long. So I've seen this multiple times, but particularly for people who are highly skilled, highly intelligent, and know it. Wisdom is a complex trait that involves sound judgment, empathy, emotional regulation, and a deep understanding of life's complexities and uncertainties. And IQ is not the same as wisdom. Knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is not putting into your fruit salad. Now, there's a variety of pharmacologic interventions, which I'd like to introduce you to, but only briefly. There are drugs like Ritalin, Adderall, Monofil, and cholinergic agents that I've listed below, all of which are sometimes considered to be smart drugs. Many of these smart drugs have nasty side effects that you have to take into account, particularly the amphetamines. More about that in a little while. But there are drugs which definitely affect cognition and ability to problem solve. Now, I've indicated that IQ is constantly being researched, and I just came across some research examples. Here's an article from 13 years ago, Intelligence, New Findings and Theoretical Developments. And it shows that right here, the IQ gap between blacks and whites has been reduced to 0.33 standard deviations in recent years. They try to explain some of the basis for this. And they've talked about things like crystallized and fluid intelligence, different kinds of intelligence. So just to show you that the idea of intelligence and IQ is evolving over time, and this is reported in the psychological literature. Here is another article from 2014, the systems biology approach to identify intelligence quotient score related genomic regions. The question is, what parts of our genome are more associated with high intelligence? And they said the genomic distribution analysis demonstrated that IQ-related genes were enriched in 7 regions of chromosome 7 and the X chromosome. So there may be regions of our chromosome that we can work with if we think that it's appropriate to work with it, if it's okay to do this kind of genetic manipulation. And that's an ethical question, which is divided into 2 groups: the bioconservatives who say leave everything alone, and the transhumanists who say if we do it under the right settings with the right precautions, we can make humanity a better place. Here is an article, the effect of methylphenidate on intelligence quotient scores in Chinese children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And below it says, and this conclusion, this is Ritalin, can enhance cognitive performance in ADHD patients, but they say here evaluating their IQ scores, and they meant, I think, elevating its IQ scores, makes me wonder if there was a problem in translation in this article. And one of the challenges that we have in the scientific literature is material which has been poorly reviewed, because it's hard to find people willing to review articles for free. Okay, but he says this result, let's go back, should not be indicated as an increase in intelligence. Okay, here's something interesting. Neonatal docosahexaenoic acid in premature preterm infants' intelligence at 5 years. So in infants born between 29 weeks of gestation, before 29 weeks of gestation, who enrolled in a study the effect of DHA supplementation on bronchopulmonary dysplasia, they got a modestly higher FSIQ scores at 5 years of age than the control feeding. So there could be things that we intervene with in neonates that can improve their intelligence at subsequent times. So that raises some issues. Why do we want cognitive enhancement? Well, type 1, help individuals with cognitive deficits. If a person has had a stroke, for example, if we are able to reduce some of the cognitive deficit with medication, that would be good. That's also true with people with syndromes, such as, for example, Down syndrome. But the second issue, more controversial, is to help normal individuals excel. And we call that cosmetic neurology. We get normal individuals and they make them smarter or clever in some sort of way. And there are a variety of approaches to do this. Now, I've mentioned drugs to enhance cognitive function. Then there's transcutaneous electrical stimulation, which I'll mention in a while, brain training apps, diet and exercise, and sleep hygiene. In particular, sleep is turning out to be more interesting than we ever imagined because so many brain functions are going on during sleep that help with cleansing the cerebrospinal fluid. And so that's a field of very active research right now. So one question is, might brain enhancement be needed to tackle the deepest philosophical and scientific mysteries? Perhaps by inducing extra growth of dendritic spines? So why would we want brain enhancement in smart people? Well, I argue, and this was an argument I had with ChatGPT, some scientific and philosophical questions may be doomed to remain mysteries, at least without some means of human cognitive enhancement. The problem of free will, the mind-body problem, the hard problem of consciousness, the challenge of formulating a coherent and complete quantum theory of gravity may be among the problems that are forever beyond the realm of the human mind, just as our cat can't solve differential equations, or in fact, even ordinary algebraic equations. So ordinary people with an ordinary IQ in the 160s, 170s still can't solve some of the biggest problems of physics. For example, quantum gravity, the most difficult unsolved problem in physics. And it's people are working on it every day as we speak around the world, trying to get that Nobel Prize in quantum gravity. And it's been a problem ever since Einstein took on the problem and did not come up with a solution. So what about brain structure and intelligence? Here's an interesting study, the assessment of the corpus callosum size in male individuals who are members of Mensa. And they found that dimensions, linear measures, and mid-sagittal cross-sectional surface area of the corpus callosum that connects the two hemispheres significantly greater in the Mensa members than in the controls. So there's something different going on in their brains. Other articles, intelligence and brain structure in normal individuals, suggesting that the size of some cerebral structures may account for a significant, although modest, proportion of the variance in human intelligence. And here's part of the dark side. This is the neurodevelopment effects of some of the anti-epileptic drugs. We do know that some of the anti-epileptic drugs during in utero exposure can result in lower IQ, language deficits, and other challenges. And we'd like to understand exactly what's going on here, because that can be very important in pediatrics. Now, what about simple methods of electrical brain stimulation? Could that increase intelligence? Well, here are some brain stimulation techniques. Transcutaneous, transcranial magnetic stimulation requires a very special setup with powerful magnets, but transcranial direct current stimulation has shown promise and is particularly easy to implement. So I'm going to concentrate on transcranial direct stimulation because, well, you can make your own kit if you want. The idea here is that when you have the depolarization waveform from a neuron, after a nodal stimulation, you get this kind of waveform compared to the normal action potential. And this changing the firing threshold to a stimulus may make you more able to solve certain kinds of problems. This is something that's a field of active research, and I'll introduce you to some of the studies. But here it's basically a headband with electrodes, one cathode, one anode. The wires go to your device. Typically, you'll go up to 2 milliamps to 1,000th of an ampere, and it uses an ordinary 9-volt battery in most cases. Does it work? Well, here's a systematic review and meta-analysis, high definition transcranial electrical stimulation, and simultaneous functional MRI and transcutaneous DCS for enhancing training of flight tasks. And the idea here is that stimulation increases activity and connectivity in flight-related brain areas, particularly in novices. It increases the brain's ability to focus on flying and ignore distractors. So this could be important for aviation. And it says a change in landing G-force. When you land the plane, for all subjects, lower bars indicate a greater improvement because less impact in performance from run 1. And you can see that post pre-training separated by experience and transcutaneous DCS shows an improvement. And here it is in more detail. We have the training and then post-training. And here you can see the sham versus the active G-force effect. And the lower post-training G-force means you landed the aircraft more pleasantly. What about enhancement of working memory in Huntington's disease? And here's an article from the peer-reviewed literature again. And patients with more severe motor symptoms shows greatest improvement, suggesting a motor symptom ratings may help identify patients who are most likely to benefit from transcutaneous DCS. Another article here, a sham-controlled crossover study about enhancement of working memory in adults with high-functioning autism. So if you want to do it yourself, well, Amazon's choice here is a unit for $130, the Brain Driver version 2. There's others available as well, but you can make your own if you want. And here's an article about how to make your own. You go to makeuseof.com and you can make your own. Here's the circuit diagram if you are one of those people who like to make your own products. But I can tell you it's probably a lot easier just to buy one. But all you need is this 9-volt battery, this transistor here, variable resistor here to control the current that goes through. And there you go. Simple enough. Now, if you look at it in more detail, the question is, where should the electrodes go? They recognize that this point here is appropriate for improved mood. This point here, F3 on the EEG settings, reduced food and alcohol cravings, and others, decreased depression, enhanced cognitive control. Now, these are all ongoing studies, but they've all been published. And now that they've been published, there's a variety of meta-analyses that have been taken care of to see how well this really works. It turns out that where the electrodes go does matter. For motor control, you want around here. For working memory, you want the electrodes here. For visual perception, you want the electrodes here. 2 milliamps for as long as 15 minutes to increase visual perception. So I thought all of this was more or less silly until I started seeing the peer-reviewed literature show up. The effects can be small in some cases, and part of it is if you don't put the electrodes in the right place, you're not going to get the kind of enhancements you want, because it really matters what part of the brain you're working on. Now, what about genes and intelligence? Genetic factors underlie about 50% of the difference in intelligence among individuals. And IQ scores of identical twins are more similar than those of fraternal twins. Siblings who are raised together in the same environment have closer IQs than those of adopted children who are brought together in the same household. So I asked ChatGPT, what are some candidate genes that have been studied in relation to intelligence? And here is 6 of them: brain-derived neurotrophic factor, dopamine receptor D2, neuroreglin 1, and so on. And those of you who are interested in get more details on each of these genes, here is the brain-derived neurotrophic factor gene. Here is the COMT gene, where it's gene location on chromosome 22. Here is the dopamine receptor D2 gene. Here is NRG1 gene. And you can see that with all of these genes, we have the opportunity in principle of implementing genetic engineering, both at the embryo level, not only to get rid of defective genes that might be a problem, for example, Tay-Sachs disease, but also to increase intelligence, which is more controversial. But also you can take normal individuals and use the CRISPR technology to try and get rid of bad genes and replace them with more desirable genes. And of course, this is a matter of considerable controversy, with the neuroconservatives on one side saying, leave it alone, and the transhumanists on the other side saying, we should do whatever we can to make humanity better, but we need to have precautions to ensure that it's done safely. So here is some of the gene therapy approaches that ChatGPT has offered to me. And those who are interested can review all of this. Gene replacement therapy can be particularly valuable, but it's a very new technology, and in some cases has resulted in some very undesirable outcomes like death.
So would that be done in utero, or could that be done in any person?
Any person. Well, it can be done in utero as well, but most of the stuff is going on. Most of the stuff is going on in adults,
Hmm.
but in utero, that's something they're working on with a view to getting rid of certain kinds of disorders. But you can imagine some person saying, well, I'm going to give you the ideal gene set for only $100,000.
Wasn't there some young child, he had a couple of gene therapies that helped him tremendously, a little toddler. But the problem, as I recall, was it was incredibly expensive, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars for each treatment.
You are completely correct, except that the hundreds of thousands of dollars may be lower than that. If you go to Google and you say, what are the world's most expensive drugs? You'll get 6 or 7 that are over $1 million for a single application. Now, in many instances, a single application is all you need to rewire your genetics. But the problem is, who's going to pay for that?
Yes.
And countries like Canada and the UK with a national healthcare system say, well, we have to decide what priorities we can offer. We want to make sure, number one, that everyone is immunized. Now, to argue that everyone should be immunized in the United States, well, that's not going to fly under the current administration. And the current administration may be happy to have super rich people getting whatever they want. So these are interesting questions, and it's all very much a field of active research. But there have been some amazing rescues in toddlers. Yes, absolutely.
Well, I was thinking even of Down syndrome.
So with Down syndrome, the challenge is to get rid of the extra chromosome. And I read recently that there was progress being made in that direction. But that probably is very different from ordinary CRISPR technology to insert and delete genes, because here you got to get rid of a whole chromosome, chromosome 21. So the answer is, it'd be interesting to spend an evening learning about it, because there's definitely a lot of interesting stuff going on. What about drugs and creativity? Throughout history, numerous artists and musicians have claimed their drug has helped them assess new ideas or altered states of consciousness that contributed to their creative output. The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley provides anecdotal evidence of that kind. He describes his experience with mescaline, explored the idea of altered states of consciousness. Some researchers examined the relationship between LSD, psilocybin, and creativity and problem solving. And here is an article, Smart Drugs, A Dose of Intelligence in Nature, which is one of our premier scientific journals. And here the question is, what can we do to make people smarter, and is this appropriate? Is it appropriate, for example, to make sure that when you're writing the medical college admission test or the law school admission test, is it appropriate if some people take neurotropic agents to boost up their skills for the purpose of the test? Now that it's been established that you can get a modest benefit may be all that you really need to bring you into the right region. Or should we require that when you do the test, you provide a urine sample? So these are interesting questions. But here's an interesting comment. Smart drugs are still primitive. They temporarily alter multiple neurotransmitters. They aren't very specific. A better approach might be to develop drugs that would promote nerve cell growth or rewiring of the brain, inducing changes that would be permanent. So that's from that article, A Dose of Intelligence. And there are dangers. Long-term drug use can result in addiction, memory issues, mental health disorders. Instead of relying on drugs to foster creativity, many experts recommend other avenues such as mindfulness exercises, rest. And it turns out sleep monitoring is turning out to be some of the more interesting aspects, because we know learning more and more about what's going on in sleep, particularly as it cleans the cerebrospinal fluid. Here's an article from Psychology Today. Cannabis and creativity, should drugs be used to facilitate creativity? Depression and creativity, the case of the German poet, scientist, and statesman Goethe. Here's an article from the psychology literature talking about some of the challenges with him as a poet and a statesman. And here's another article, Lifestyle Use of Drugs by Healthy People for Enhancing Cognition, Creativity, Motivation, and Pleasure. Now, again, you're divided by the bioconservatives who just want to stay away from this kind of stuff, and some of the transhumanists who say, if it makes life better and it's safe, then go for it, or at least let other people go for it if you're not interested. But that is very much a matter of ongoing controversy. Here is Jim Morrison. You remember him. He died from alcohol abuse and other drugs. Exemplary case showing how heavy drinking, the abuse of LSD, mescaline, and amphetamines damaged his capacity to realize creative motivation. He basically overindulged and things went wrong. So there's safety issues. And here's an article, Potential Safety Benefits and Influence of the Placebo Effect in Microdosing Psychedelic Drugs. And he systematically reviews this. The idea is that you take small doses of LSD or psilocybin, and can you get therapeutic effects when the doses are so small you wouldn't expect them to have much of an effect, hence microdosing. A lot of research going on right now, particularly outside the United States, because it's still hard to get approval for some of these studies in the US. But it's a field of active research. But here's an article, Microdosing Psychedelics, Motivation, Subjective Effects, and Harm Reduction. And it says, our findings suggest that people microdosing are commonly doing so as a self-managed therapy for mental health, either as an alternative or as an adjunct to conventional treatment. So as psychedelics are entering the clinical world, and we're trying to learn more and more about where they're useful, particularly with ketamine, more and more research of this kind is taking place. Now, here's something especially interesting. Natural language signatures of psilocybin microdosing. And they say, except for semantic variability, these metrics of natural language signatures presented significant differences between a typical active microdose and the inactive placebo condition. Machine learning classifiers were capable of distinguishing conditions with high accuracy. So basically, it can tell between those people who took placebos and those people who took microdoses in terms of their speech. They looked at variability, variables such as verbosity, semantic variability, and sentiment scores. So that is fascinating. So one of the questions that comes up is, with all of these people doing their own private testing at home, there's an idea that professional and recreational chemists produce potentially dangerous new molecules expected to be fun to consume and make them available on the dark web to risk-taking adventurers. So there's communities on the dark web where chemists, amateur chemists, but often highly skilled, produce new drugs and make them available to people who want to play with them. And needless to say, the possibility of catastrophe is there. And I was thinking that it might be the basis for some sort of a horror story of a drug experiment that goes wrong. But here's something interesting. John Hoffman, an organic chemist at Clemson University, synthesized many compounds that activate the endocannabinoid system. So basically, these are analogs of cannabis or analogs of THC. JWH, named after his name, 18, is one of these compounds with studies showing an affinity to cannabinoid receptor 5 times greater than that of THC. So he did all this research as an organic chemist and became relatively important. He published all the synthesis pathways, as you would expect to be doing as a chemist, only to find out years later that amateur chemists were producing all of these things and making them available, and they were not illegal because they weren't on the list of illegal drugs, but they bound to the cannabinoid receptors and they had the same effect as cannabis. So this was a case of unintended consequences. Here's an article, the International Journal of Drug Policy, assessing open science and citizen science in addictions and substance use in research, a scoping review. So the whole idea is, if citizen science, is that dangerous, or should we be taking advantage of some of the things that we learn? So self-blinding citizen science to explore psychedelic microdosing. Here's an article here. about learning more about microdosing. And this is unauthorized science. This is not done with approval from an institutional review board, in many cases because these people are not academics, and also because the research protocols would not be approved by the institutional review boards. Here's an interesting question. Can MDMA change socio-political values? Insight from a research participant. So MDMA, or known as the empathy drug, people are interested in seeing what its role might be in psychotherapy. And in one case, they did an experiment where registered volunteers participated in this approved study. And what he found out was this guy no longer was a racist. He was a white supremacist. He took MDMA in a scientific study, then came to question his extreme views. So could it be useful to rehabilitate people who are Nazis, for example? Or would that be something that is too mind-altering? But if we're able to go and get some people to renounce horrifying points of view with drug therapy, is this something that we should consider as an alternative to prison, for example? Or is this something that is going too far? So that's interesting. Meanwhile, psychiatrists are particularly interested in ecstasy as a potential drug for treating PTSD, which is very common in psychiatric circles.
Yes, but are the effects long lasting, or is it something that they'd have to continue taking?
So good question. You'd have to search the literature to find out. I'm guessing you'd have to continue to take it.
I would think so too.
Yeah. But they might not mind it since it's a popular street drug. Here is a very interesting story, and it goes back a number of years. Paul Erdos was perhaps the most prolific mathematician of all time. He published and published and published and published, but he was, by any stretch of the imagination, a very weird guy. He basically had a suitcase, and he would go to a selected collaborator and live with them for a while. And together they would come up with a whole series of papers. And then he would help establish this guy's career. Then he would go on to another guy, work with him, establish a whole pile of papers. And in part, he did this because he was a mathematician who loved mathematics. He didn't have a normal social life. He just basically picked somebody and said, I'm going to work with you. And he was so famous and so honored that no mathematician would say no. But he did it all with the assistance of methamphetamines. And in 1979, a colleague bet him $500 he couldn't stop taking the drug for a full month. He stopped, he won the bet, but he said, "You've showed me I'm not an addict, but I didn't get any work done. I get up in the morning, stare into a blank piece of paper. I have no ideas, just like an ordinary person. You've set mathematics back a month." And he presumably continued on until his death at age 83. So among mathematicians, there's a debate. Would it be Euler, or would it be Erdos, who's the most prolific mathematician of all times?
It would be Euler.
It's what?
It would be Euler, no question.
No question. Okay. Well, Euler was amazing, and he was not your normal guy. And then some people would take, well, what about Gauss? And also you have to take into account the importance of their contributions. But in case of Erdos, all this went and resulted in published peer-reviewed stuff. So this was cognitive enhancement, and this might be the cognitive enhancement to solve the greatest problems in physics. Who knows? He used to say that when he looked at a piece of paper on amphetamines, he'd see math all over the page. And when he looked at the paper without amphetamines, he just saw a blank piece of paper. He commented to a writer who mentioned his use of amphetamines in a profile. He said, "You shouldn't have mentioned the stuff about benzodrine. It's not that you got it wrong. It's just I don't want kids to think going into mathematics, it's going to require drugs. Now, here's something interesting that only became to light about a decade ago, and that is the entire Third Reich was permeated with drugs, cocaine, heroin, morphine, and most of all, methamphetamines or crystal meth. Promiscuous use of drugs at the very highest levels also impaired and confused decision-making, with Hitler and his entourage taking refuge in potentially lethal cocktails of stimulants administered by Dr. Morell as the war turned against Germany. So that's an interesting book, Blitz, and I think you'd quite enjoy it. This is the drug that was popular at that time. It was just recently invented. 15 milligrams per ml, intended for intramuscular or subcutaneous administration. And it's a version of crystal meth. Now, here's something you might not know. This is the drug that the Hamas terrorists took to help them slaughter the Israelis on October 7th. It was October 7th, yeah. Another synthetic amphetamine drug. So the idea is that even today, people are using drugs to conduct warfare. Captagon is the particular methamphetamine in this case. Okay, well, let's move on to another topic. How are we doing for time? What do you think, Ruth?
No, we're fine, and you guys don't mind if we run over, do you?
Okay. Well, neuroprosthetic engineering, the idea is that AI and other technologies can help in some ways. AI-powered memory aids and decision support systems will assist individuals with memory or cognitive function defects or deficits. Brain-computer interfacing is something that people are working on actively, particularly people who have severe paraplegia, and they may be a useful tool for cognitive enhancement in the future. Here is an article from 4 years ago, the Journal of Neurointerventional Surgery, motor neuroprosthesis implanted with neurointerventional surgery improves capacity for activities in daily living in severe paralysis. So the idea is that you put these electrodes here in the brain, and then you can alter your own brain activity and use this eye tracker to actually control the computer and work through whatever you want to do. Basically, use your computer. Neuralink is something that we're already familiar with, launched 10 years ago, 2016. And it has a mission to create a generalized brain interface to restore autonomy to those unmet medical needs and unlock human potential tomorrow. Now, other things that people recommend for neural enhancement are cognitive training, and there are a variety of computer-based and in-person cognitive training methods. Here's a book on this that I would recommend for those who want more information. There are lifestyle interventions, and I mentioned sleep, regular physical exercise, proper nutrition. These are all important aspects that can be valuable. Sleep deprivation can affect cognition. You have increased tolerance of risk, impaired performance on attention-intensive tasks, increased distractibility. So sleep deprivation is a problem. And yet, one of the challenges in the medical community is sleep deprivation occurs all the time when you are on call and when you are doing your residency, or in fact, even as a medical student. And so when you are taking care of a whole ward of patients, it's 3 a.m, you would want to be on your best, but impaired performance is something that we have to worry about. So that's an interesting problem, and I don't have an immediate solution for it. But for the most part, we want to make sure that you get all the sleep that you need. Gamification can be used to create immersive and engaging cognitive training exercises as well. And people are working on approaches to improve cognition through gamification. Then there's herbal, botanical, and naturopathic approaches. Here is something you can get. This is available. I think I got this from Amazon. And $15.50 for 30 vegetarian capsules. Here's another one, advanced memory formula for only $40, one-time payment. Neurovite Plus multivitamins from Brain MD, formulated with 50 plus optimal bioavailable nutrients. Cognicare, here's another one, Here's more if you want to buy from Brainall. Brings us to the realm of cure-all tonics and snake oil. All of these things are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. If they say that, they're not required to provide evidence of efficacy before marketing them. And in fact, you see them on TV all the time. If the FDA studies them and finds out they're dangerous, they'll take them off the market. Most of these things have a placebo effect and are not necessarily dangerous. So here's an article for those interested, 25 years of botanical dietary supplemental research and the lessons learned. Despite a quarter century of public use, healthcare professionals still know little about botanical dietary supplements, and thus it falls to industry to join forces, and they're not doing that. What about ethical issues? Well, there's issues of informed consent, confidentiality, voluntary participation, deception, and debriefing. And I think most people are comfortable with these issues in a scientific research setting. The question is, what about if it's outside of a scientific research setting where people are simply trying things to see what will happen? But informed consent is perhaps the most important of these, and confidentiality so that your data doesn't become outside the researcher's realm. Here are some articles from the scientific literature. Do-it-yourself brain stimulation, implications and ethical considerations, brain stimulation for ethical treatment in children. So one of the questions is, now that we have this simple form of DIY brain stimulation, the 2 milliamp DC current approach, now that we know more and more, we have people who are giving it to their children prior to test taking, for example. And is this ethical? Because the children are not providing consent. So that's an interesting issue. So safety first. Brain enhancement technologies may carry unforeseen risks and potential side effects. Long-term safety not well established in some cases. Need for rigorous research in some cases. There's a risk of over-medicalization where cognitive differences with the realm of the normal human variation are treated as medical conditions requiring enhancement intervention, particularly in people who are worried about standardized testing. So there's regulation issues and the need for a robust regulatory framework. The long-term effects on society, ethical analysis consider the potential impacts on education, employment, interpersonal relationships, and the overall fabric of society. But if cognitive enhancements offer significant advantages, such as an education in the workplace, could lead to increased competition, put pressure on others to undergo enhancement as well, further exacerbating societal inequalities. So there is equity, access, and inclusion issues, which have a number of people, the bioconservatives in particular, arguing that they should not become available. There's also issues of coercion and pressure to make sure that you do what other people are doing to get the outcome you're seeking. But there are unintended consequences, and some of these things cannot necessarily be anticipated without waiting for years. There's also philosophical and ethical questions about the potential impact of cognitive enhancement on the individual sense of identity and authenticity, and I have a whole chapter on that in this book. What does it mean to be human? Enhancements that fundamentally alter cognitive abilities would challenge the notion of what it means to be human and how we define our individuality. So that brings us to an end. We'll leave a little bit of time for discussion, and I appreciate the opportunity for the presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
No, thank you. It was very interesting. And I have a few questions, but I'll let everybody else talk first.
I have a comment.
Go ahead, Jim.
So I have a little story. So my mother had dementia, and at the end of her life, she was in a dementia ward, and she was in a room with 2 beds, and the other bed was vacant, and the staff allowed me to stay with her while she was dying. Excuse me. And so I had the privilege of living in a dementia ward for about a week and a half. And it was a life-changing experience. Okay. And I decided, you know what? I never want to end up in a dementia ward. And so over time, I developed a protocol for keeping my brain healthy and trying to maximize my intelligence so that I wouldn't end up in that situation. And mostly what it is just I basically stopped doing things that were making me stupid. Okay. No alcohol, no drugs. I never drank, I never did drugs, but I just became more careful about my lifestyle. And so I developed something sort of like a pilot's pre-flight checklist. Okay, I developed this protocol that it's my pre-day checklist that I go through every morning. So first of all, I don't use an alarm clock. Okay, what I do is I sleep until I wake up. Right? And that helps me to get adequate sleep. And then the first thing I do is I hydrate properly. One thing that I didn't see covered in your presentation, which was excellent, by the way, was the importance of hydration. So the first thing I do in the morning is hydrate, and then I immediately go for a run. Okay, and not a long run. Okay, I have a minimum run that's a half mile. Okay, because I know I can always run a half mile no matter what. And so I get up, I go for my run. I usually sprint at the end. I get my brain fully oxygenated. I think that's really important. And I also get some light exposure. Then another thing I like to do under the heading of cognitive training is free recall. Okay, so I'm always studying and learning something. And so what I do in the morning is I take out a blank sheet of paper and I try to write down everything I can possibly remember about the subject that I'm trying to learn. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Free recall. It's a very, very effective way of learning. And a lot of times it takes me many days to learn whatever it is I'm trying to learn, but it is effective ultimately. So another thing that I think a lot of us struggle with today is overstimulation. We're just bombarded with so much information. And I have a couple of ways I deal with that. One is meditation, a particular type of meditation where this is going to sound weird, but I put a little spot on the wall, just a little dot, and I sit and I just stare at the dot and I try to hold my focus on that spot. And what I'm doing is I'm developing focus by doing that. I'm developing my mind's ability to focus on something without distraction. Another thing I do, there's something called reduce environmental stimulation therapy, REST. And basically what it is sensory deprivation. And so I have a dark room with no windows. And sometimes in the middle of the day when I feel overwhelmed, I go into my little dark, cool space and I lie down for 20 minutes and I just turn everything off. And I think that helps. Anyway, that was my comment. But thank you so much, Dr. Doyle, for this talk. It was very informative.
Okay. The full slide set covers a lot more material, but I didn't want to go on for hours. So it's just such a fascinating topic, and there's so many different aspects of it, and all of it raises social, political, and ethical issues that not easily resolved. In fact, unresolvable, because ultimately the bioconservatives and the transhumanists will never come to an agreement any more than the Republicans and the Democrats in the States. Fascinating.
So are you familiar with Richard Hare's book, The Neuroscience of Intelligence?
I've heard of it, but I don't have it.
I had a question or comment. It was really interesting. I am not a medical professional, although I come from a family of doctors and research scientists. So I always grew up discussing various issues. And when you mentioned the neurostimulation tools that's available on Amazon, I was really taken aback by the potential for injury and obviously, permanent damage, because I was thinking I think they still do that when somebody's super depressed or organically depressed with the electroshock therapy that, has really caused a lot of problems. And I know that Amazon can get out of legal liability. My former day job was as a lawyer.
Very different
So,
from
yeah, I
transdermal.
know they can do the disclaimer and all that, but
Yeah.
from an ethical point of view, I wonder, I mean, unless you're a scientist, you can do a lot of damage and fry parts of your brain that you really don't want to be frying with that type of thing. And that reminded me in the early days that they did that with electroshock therapy for depressed
It's
people.
not just early days. It's still a recommended therapy. And I've provided anesthesia for hundreds of patients to get ECT. The trouble is, in the right patients, that therapy actually works. And I say that as a detached clinician because I have no interest in these patients other than curiosity. In the right selected patients, it works. And there's been randomized trials showing that.
What about aren't there potentials of brain bleeds and strokes and all kinds of crazy stuff?
If you don't do it right, all
Yeah.
sorts of trouble. And if you don't do it for the right kind of patients. So I remember one of the psychiatrists was using it for patients with schizophrenia, and I thought that's not a classical indication. And he said basically, yeah, but nothing else works.
Wow.
And there have been enough good outcomes or improved outcomes that ECT still is a popular therapy. Now, things have changed a little bit because people who are refractory to SSRIs and MAO inhibitors and tricyclics and quadricyclics and ECT often get an amazing response to ketamine under the right circumstances, but it only lasts about a week.
Wow.
And so the idea is that you'd come back once a week and you'd get more ketamine. Now ketamine is being available in a nasal form and you'd be able to self-administer it. But for some people who are suicidal and now are enjoying life again because of ketamine, you could hardly say that's wrong. But we don't really understand it.
It's addictive. Isn't it severely addictive, ketamine?
Not like heroin, but yeah.
Well, I imagine so.
Yeah. So it gets the question of what is it? To what extent is it? You don't go through withdrawal in the same kind of way you do with heroin, but you can get this pattern where I'm so used to it, I want to take it all the time. And we found some movie stars who did exactly that.
Interesting. My father had patients, and he was internal medicine and infectious diseases, and he would have to get them off heroin, or one or two of them, by doing methadone.
Oh, yeah, and it's still mainstream therapy.
Yeah.
Of interest, methadone is actually good for a drug to reduce pain during anesthesia. First time I saw it used, I took over a case, I was really surprised, and then learned more and more about it. So there's definitely a place for methadone in anesthesia. You don't get the highs that you'd get with other drugs, and that's part of the benefit because it lasts a long time.
Thank you for the presentation. Was just so wonderful and so great. I'm looking forward to hearing the recording again. There's so much to unpack. Really enjoyed it. Thank
good.
you.
Okay.
Well, I was going to say, you could always do a part 2 presentation for the slides that you didn't get to cover today. So
yeah.
But you had mentioned about, that if there were, cognitive enhancement drugs that were more mainstream, that it would lead to socioeconomic diversity, and that it'd give people an advantage and things like that. But don't you think that's already going on now? I mean, look at these people, and what comes to mind is like Washington, D.C. That, some of those people are working 18-hour days, and so they're either, caffeine even can help with, energy and also neurocognition, but that they're on other things too, to give them that little edge, that advantage to be able to do their current jobs. So
yes,
I think it's going on now.
Oh, it's definitely going on now, particularly in student circles, where people will take a little bit of Ritalin just before their final exams so they can study 8 hours straight without interruption, or even 18 hours straight without interruption.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's going on now. It's not legal, or it is not necessarily legal. There are a number of instances where methamphetamine is legal for ADHD.
Mhm.
And if you take it within the prescribed rules, you should be okay. But some people were overdosing on it to get more of an effect.
Yeah. Well,
And-
and that was, you go ahead.
Well, so sometimes I wonder about what are going to be the long-term effects after 20 years of it.
That's
Although
what I
Eros
was
taking
going
them
to talk
forever.
about. Yeah.
Paradise was taking them forever. But he was not a
And-
normal person by any means.
Well, and the thing is, so methamphetamine, I know it great deal of focus. I mean, major focus, but sometimes people end up focusing on the wrong thing, on the minutia, instead of what they intended to focus on when they're on methamphetamine. And the other thing is that they've shown with the long-term effects that it can totally change the brain chemistry. And the person, who started on the meth, 10, 20 years later, they're a totally different person now because it changed them so much. So I don't know, if you had more of a lower controlled dose, if you'd still have that same outcome. And I'm basing this basically on street drugs, where they tend to do higher doses. But I'm wondering if they have a more controlled dose of methamphetamine, that it really could be productive without having the long-term side effects.
Yeah, and that's basically the microdosing concept.
Yeah. So,
So there's legions of scientists who would be glad to explore your questions if you gave them a couple of $1 million in funding so that they could do the studies.
no, I was going to volunteer as a research participant. No, you never know. But then, some of those neurotropics that you had listed, I actually take supplements from Brain MD, and it's not the one you showed, but it is, but is brain, for cognitive enhancement. And I started taking it before I took the Mensa exam. And like I said, I scored better than I ever had. So I think there's some truth to some of those supplements that are out there now.
Well, you have anecdotal evidence. The question
Yeah.
is, can you get 400 candidates and randomize them into,
Why now?
yeah. And that's the challenge, to make it into a scientific question that is suitable for critical review and publication in the scientific literature, where the standards are much higher.
Yeah, I saw Dr. Amen give a couple presentations on PBS, and that's how I even learned about him and the supplements and the PET scans that he does and things like that. And I was pretty impressed with some of the results he was coming up with. So, and now, of course, now he's gotten more commercial, because this was like 20 years ago when he was first starting out. But anyway, so does anybody else have any questions, comments for Dr. Doyle? So he did ask me, he does have a long list of presentations, and whether you guys would be interested in him coming back again sometime and give a different presentation.
Absolutely.
Certainly.
Yeah,
What
Big thumbs
topics
up.
interest you?
What kind of, what are you guys interested in hearing? So, well, tell them what you've done. You've done, I know the ethics, operating room ethics, I believe.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, and AI in medicine, I think.
Yep.
And I can't remember all your talks, but so I'm trying to give them an oversight of what your what talks you have, so then they can better tell you what they'd rather hear.
Dr. Doyle, which one would you prefer to do?
Well, they're all fascinating. So it's an opportunity to take a topic, explore in more detail, and making a slide set is a great way of learning a
Interesting.
topic.
Yes.
So we can give him a topic and he'll create a presentation.
Yeah. The other thing is, I have a particular fascination with ChatGPT and other AIs. The question is, what is its role going to be in ordinary life? One interesting question is, can AI be a therapist? And so far as I can tell, it has failed miserably when there was a teenager who was working with AI, with ChatGPT, and it encouraged him on his pathway to suicide.
Right.
Uh,
But you know, that came up the other night at one of our Mensa dinners or something. We were talking about that. And it basically comes down to the programming of the AI and what set they use and how thorough they're programming it, and if they're looking for the other people at the table could tell you remember it more in depth than I can. But you know, I think a lot of it does have to do with the base programming of the AI.
so you have to have a particular set of documents that's used for training. And in the case of ChatGPT, it basically scraped the whole internet. And
Yeah.
because there's a lot of garbage in the internet, it collects some of that garbage too.
Yes, I know of several gross errors that appeared on ChatGPT.
That's what we were talking about. That was how to eliminate bias in AI. Just because of that, because some programmers will give it specific information. ChatGPT is the whole internet, which there's a lot of fake information out there. So how do you eliminate bias in an AI?
Well,
It's hard.
one approach that was taken by openevidence.com. So openevidence.com is the go-to site for doctors who want quality information. And it uses as its training data, not the whole internet, but a subset of the peer-reviewed medical literature focusing on the New England Journal of Medicine and Journal of the American Medical Association and a variety of other journals that are highly respected. And the idea here is that it's not going to rely on some commentator from Reddit. And it verifies all of the references that it provides. Now, ChatGPT will come up with fake references, but I found out if you ask ChatGPT only provide verified references from PubMed, it will do exactly that.
Mm.
But even in medicine, there's concerns about bias. And an example would be that a lot of our drug studies are carried out on white males. And so we don't get the insights we would get from women necessarily. And they need to be evaluated on women as well. But
Well,
you have to get approval through the FDA for this kind of population.
well, you know, the FDA implemented DEI, which now I guess is out the window with the current administration, because I do clinical research. And that's one thing that we've really been striving the last few years is get in a cross section of the population, because I think you're well aware that if we have, say, all white males, when the drug gets marketed, it's going to behave totally differently in the real population. Because
That's the concern. That's
yeah.
exactly the concern.
So we are very, very careful now of enrolling patients, not only gender wise, but ethnicity. So I had a Tagalog patient the other, recently, and I never even heard of Tagalog before that one. But I know what that one is now. But yeah, and especially in the Asian population, behaves totally differently than the white population does. So we're striving to be inclusive of all people in the research now.
Yeah, I think if you could provide adequate funding, the researchers are pleased to do multiple studies across multiple populations, but
Yeah.
you need the funding, and funding is not easy to get, particularly now where we have an anti-science administration.
Yeah, I know. I know. Because one of the things is we could find a population. Part of it is like you said, the funding, because some of them don't have the transportation or the funds to be able to transport to a site that is actually doing the research.
Yeah.
So, we had so many contacts overseas from Turkey, from Israel, from, Palestine, all different countries that wanted to participate, but some could afford and some actually did fly to the US, but others couldn't. And the study wasn't approved over in that country at the time. So,
Yeah, understandable.
but anyway. So what topic do you guys want to hear next? What will probably be after the first of the year? I can, you know what, I can.
Maybe AI and